It's interesting that the guy asking the question comes to the front, but the person that answers it is not here. I wanted to ask Fala, who just spoke last, because I think you alluded to it a little bit about the, let's say, the irony of that within the city of Porto, the kind of facade needs to stay, and then the back is there, and you kind of spoke, let's say, abstractly about it, but in reality, most of your projects kind of do that. So could you just elaborate a bit on the reality that you do, there's something you hate, but then you do it yourself. I know you're not, you're aware of that, but I think you didn't maybe especially kind of verbalize it. And I'll just keep talking while you slowly walk up here because of the oddity that the questioner is in the front.
Yes, in a lot of cases we sort of have to do it also. What we're critical of is not the fact of building something new behind existing facades, is the fact that, let's say, there is a regulation and that, let's say, forces you to keep to keep only the street facade and to do something else. So my point is, let's say, if you give a value to the street facade, you also have to give a value to what is behind. It's the whole built typologies that has a value, and in that case, you know, why just keeping the street facade? But then, in our cases, we have to keep the street facade, so we do it. If we could, let's say, when the building doesn't have an extraordinary value, if we could demolish the street facade, we would. That's it. So, yeah. But
maybe to pick up on that, there was one phrase that struck me, which you said, which was, transformed buildings are new buildings.
Yeah. How
does that make sense?
No, the point is that for us it's the same. Let's say a project is a project, and of course we know that the project we do is also sort of a temporary thing because in 20 years it might be transformed into something else. But for us, doing a transformation, the result of the transformation and the result of a new building are the same. For us, it's exactly the same value. So we look at it exactly with the same eyes. And we judge it with the same. So of course, there is more constraints, and sometimes we keep some of the existing things and so on. But for us, the only thing that matters is the end of our process, let's say. I don't know if that answers the question. So we look at transformed buildings as new buildings, as if it was a totally new project. That's all. Yeah.
But there's a lot of definition given already prior to your intervention. Doesn't make that different?
Yes, but what matters to us is the final result. And we look at the final result as if it was a totally new building.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying. I mean, of course, they're not exactly the same process, and there's a phase of discrimination between what we keep or not in the beginning that doesn't exist in a new building, but for us, yeah, really, the only thing that matters is the final result, and if it's a new building or a transformation, it's the same. So ultimately, the result of a transformation, we look at this as if it was a new building.
It's interesting because it's entirely different than the reason why I like the topic of transformation. Mm-hmm. You look at it from the end, from the result, and I find it different that there is, or find it interesting that there's basically half of the project is already done when I start. And my main reference for this is actually music. So when musicians cover another piece, I think there's something incredibly taking place that balances an external input and your own appropriation in a way that completely redefines authorship. And I think that's quite important for architecture too.
I think a good cover should stand on its own, as if it was a song without any precedent.
Okay.
That's a bit how I see it.
So when Miles Davis covers the Concierto de Aranjuez, I mean, you obviously listen and you identify the original composition. Mm-hmm. Don't you think that makes it different, that this composition existed?
Yes, but if it's not good enough to stand without the first one, it's not good enough. That's a bit, no?
Okay, but I think Felipe wanted to say something.
No, can you hear me? So I just think that I perfectly understand what Ahmed said, and I agree with it because we kind of stay on the same page, but there's one thing I would like to add. I give you two examples. He showed a photo of a garage house, probably the least interesting space we were supposed to intervene in, the space where everyone asked us, the client, the contractor, the parents of the clients, please change this. It looks not like a house. Mm-hmm. We touched nothing. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, as architects had the responsibility to say that the biggest statement in such a project is to do nothing, accept it as it is. The space has the qualities you need for a house. Mm-hmm. In other cases, we have the absolute opposite. We have buildings that have historical value, aka they are old. And because of that, the client says, I want to keep it all. And our first instinct is to just erase it. It's not good at all. In any case, we have a space that preserved all its qualities in the first example, and we have a space that was completely erased in the second. But both times, what really makes it ours is not if there was a huge amount of stuff to keep or if there was a huge amount of stuff we took away. It's the fact that we as architects, as the thinkers, as the makers, we decided to keep it or to remove it. That's our role when we are transforming. Of course, there's a slightly difference when you build from scratch, but not in this sense. That's why I was saying I completely agree with Ahmed that we as the thinkers, we decide what actually constitutes the value. And what we are struggling now is that we've come from a context of highly fast gentrification. No one cares about anything except front facades. The preservation rules are absolute bullshit. Like they just preserve, we love tourists, we need them. We need to make them happy. So they came here to take that photo. You're not gonna deny them the photo. That's the rule. That's how the law was written. And based on that, all the actual legacy of the buildings is being erased. There's a tsunami of bulldozers demolishing the city of Porto right now that I love very much because I'm local, but I honestly don't mind it. Okay, you're gonna change, the whole city was based on a concept of renovation, of demolishing, of substitution, but let's really replace it. If you're gonna replace the building, replace it completely. Don't act like you have this jacuzzi glass elevator tower behind, but it looks 17th century. So we as thinkers need to be smart enough to understand that sometimes a nasty space has a value to be preserved, and we are inside a space that my parents wouldn't like, but I don't care about their thinking because they are not architects, we are. But they would love spaces that we completely erase, and they just say, why are you doing that? Because it's our role to question and to understand that we are in 2019, not 1922. So the times change, the perspectives change. So that's why for us it's exactly the same new and old, or transformation and new building, because of the mental aspect of it, not on the process. Of course it's different on the process, but the final result is what really matters in the end, that you can look at it and say, we as architects decided this was going to happen this way and not the other way around.
Okay, I think that's clearer now. There's a question there over there. The lady.
Let's put it on the table.
I had a question. Actually, this answer we as architects know, and the others, the users, they sometimes cannot recognize our work or what we do. Is it a bit not, I don't know how to say.
Arrogant?
For example. I'm also an architect, by the way. But I would like to address the question, where is actually our role, and how many things can we define, and how free space can we leave to the users, to the people who really would be in these buildings, and how they're going to feel. Shouldn't they also feel so enthusiastic with a building like this if the qualities are good? I think the quality should not be only by architects recognized, but also from the users. I don't know.
I don't believe architecture is democratic. As many other subjects, not just architecture. I think that there's a point to which we need to accept that if our cardiologist tells us that we need a surgery, he probably knows best. And I'm not saying that the person on the other side might not be able to understand what he's doing or not. Of course, there's a certain extent. I always use my parents because they clearly don't. They clearly are as far away from architecture as possible. After 15 years, they still don't understand what I do. But I would give you a different example. We have our very small office, the current one, in a building right next to the new Hard Rock Cafe in Porto. It's a building built in the late 40s by an outstanding modernist architect from Porto. And in order to have this building built, 3 small typical buildings in Porto from the period were demolished. And he built this very long building with row windows, an open plan, beautiful spiral staircases, so all the ingredients from the period. Today in the street, this is the only modern building. Like the whole street is made out of these old buildings, all of them transformed into guest houses and Airbnbs and 3-star hotels, all of them with restaurants of pizza, burger, Indian place, you know, the typical Portuguese food. And our building is the only one that has protection by the Heritage Department on the street. It's the only one that has the maximum grade of classification. And it's the only one, in my perspective, worth visiting. And we have, I mean, I'm taking the example of our office. I could take probably hundreds of examples, either in Porto, Basel, China, it doesn't matter. Probably there are others like it. But the point is, if I bring there my parents, they tell me, looking me in the eyes, this is the ugliest building in this street. This is the one we should demolish. This is the one we should get rid of. And what happened now in Porto, because Ahmed presented 2 examples, is that the first step was we preserve the facades, we change everything that is behind, which I think it's sad because the soul of the building is not just on the facade. Then a second moment happened where they just said, we protect everything. So pretty much anything that looks old will be preserved. So not only the city center, but in the whole city of Porto, these laws are progressing and progressing. But the worst example, and the second one was that the new buildings that are built look old, which is terrible. So you preserve everything that is old, no change. If you build new, it looks old. And then the few modern buildings you have in Porto that are being refurbished right now, they keep everything that is behind because those were great behind, and you build old facades in front. So yes, I do believe we know best. And the people that are making these regulations, they are not taking into consideration that this moment that is requiring photographing material for the tourists is actually hurting very, very much the city on the long term. So our building in our street is the one that is wrong. Although, thank God, a bit of this regulation of protection protected the only building worth protecting in that street. But my parents, they don't agree. So if we make this about democracy, we might have a couple of problems. We might also have a couple of advantages, but...
I'm just gonna add something. There's always this reference that you probably heard of it, about Ford, that he decided to make the first car. But when he asked a client what he wanted, he said faster horses. He never thought that he could have a car because he didn't know what was it. So I think our role as architects is to understand what the clients want, but not the image they have in their minds, because it might not be exactly what they wanted, or we can give them something even better. I think that's our role. We cannot expect that they will know all the possibilities, and we have to only give them the images they have in their minds. It's not saying that the client doesn't matter, it's exactly the opposite. It's trying to really fully understand what they actually mean when they say, I want a typical house. And in the end, what they wanted was just a pitch roof. Or they want tiles, so it's really trying to go even further in what they want, and also educate them a little bit more in terms of architecture.
All right, thanks a lot. Now, we need to do this later, because now there's a break, because we're getting behind schedule. Let's... No, there's another discussion at the end, after the two. This was just an improvised, actually not even officially sanctioned discussion. So keep your question, please. Let's take a break. There's coffee and other stuff, and we come back in half an hour. Thanks.